Welcome to Payback with Silas. Every day, a new story, lies, betrayal, payback. Let's begin.
We're restructuring, Cal. Your role's been eliminated effective immediately. I stared at the HR manager's lips, barely moving under the fluorescent lighting of the conference room, as if the words were on delay. There was a thick file on the table, already labeled with my name, Callum R. Hayes. Not Cal. Not the name anyone had used for the last 14 years. Next to her sat Vernon Glass, our new director of corporate strategy, all swagger and softness, with perfect teeth and zero history. He looked at me like I was a spreadsheet cell he'd just zeroed out. I nodded once. Got it. No protest. No drama. Just quiet understanding. The kind that unsettles people more than yelling ever could. I gathered my leather-bound notebook, my old titanium Mont Blanc pen, a gift from my father on my first promotion, and walked out. No box, no backpack. The rest could stay. I didn't need the office knickknacks to remember what I'd built here. Outside the glass-walled conference room, no one looked up. No, what happened? No, I'll call you later. Just the tap-tap-tap of keyboards, Slack pings, and performative urgency. The company was Ashcroft & Bell, a mid-sized commercial real estate firm in Denver, Colorado, just big enough to be bloated, just small enough to stay under regulatory radars. I joined in 2009, right after the recession, when no one wanted office space and everyone wanted answers. I built the business intelligence division from scratch, designing internal tools to predict vacancy risk, detect tenant churn, optimize asset portfolios. Most people didn't even understand what I actually did. They just knew that whenever I spoke in meetings, senior partners took notes. Or they used to. That morning, I was let go. That afternoon, no one noticed I was gone. Back at my apartment, a quiet brick complex in the Highland neighborhood with a view of the Front Range on clear days, I sat on my worn leather couch, letting the silence settle. No meetings. No emails. No last-minute report requests from sales. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of my knees as I leaned forward. I'd given 14 years to Ashcroft. I'd stayed late, mentored new analysts, saved them from at least 2 data breaches they never even knew happened. And now I was just another name off the payroll. A spreadsheet adjustment. I didn't call anyone. Didn't post on LinkedIn. Didn't tell my sister in Boulder. I wasn't ready for the sympathy. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and accessed a private folder buried 4 levels deep. It was labeled simply, Ashcroft, Logs. I hadn't looked at it in months. But I had a feeling I'd need it soon. It had started small. They always do. A subtle change in access privileges 6 months ago. My admin rights to the data warehouse were reduced for compliance alignment, according to a 2-line email from IT, sent at 2:11 a.m. on a Saturday. No conversation. No explanation. Just clipped language and a new red X when I tried to run batch queries on the tenant churn model. I should have asked questions. Instead, I adapted. That was always my role. Quiet, capable, flexible. A month later, I noticed budget review meetings happening without me. Meetings I used to run. Instead, Vernon Glass had looped in an external consultant named Troy Renner, a name that sounded like an AI-generated soap opera villain. He wore navy suits without socks and used phrases like data agility and monetization levers without irony. The consultant started presenting dashboards to senior leadership, visualizations I recognized instantly. They were mine. Custom SQL queries, lifted and repackaged with new color palettes and watermarked logos from Renner Analytics. No one acknowledged where they came from. I could have made noise. Instead, I watched. The funny thing about being the person who builds the systems? You also build the blind spots. The false variables. The masked admin keys. The ghost environment I had set up years ago for sandbox testing still ran silently in parallel, untouched by their reconfigurations, invisible to their audits. I started running quiet deltas, comparing official data flows with the backups I'd kept in my own mirrored sandbox. And that's when I noticed the anomalies. Quarter over quarter, Ashcroft's building portfolio showed steady growth in asset value, which aligned with their investor reports, but not with the actual lease data. Several Class B properties in Dallas and Phoenix were reporting 95% occupancy rates, yet in the raw tenant logs, the suites were empty. Not inactive, empty. I flagged a few discrepancies in my notes. Just numbers, at first. But as the weeks passed and I kept pulling thread after thread, a pattern began to emerge. Phantom tenants. Inflated valuations. Recycled LLCs. And all of them pointed to the same external leasing agent firm, Keyline Partners, a supposedly independent contractor brought in by Vernon shortly after he was hired. They had no website. No public contact number. Just a P.O. box in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and a list of transactions that didn't quite add up. I started backing everything up. Not just spreadsheets, but access logs, metadata, old org charts, signed memos from internal tools I was no longer supposed to see. I kept it all. Meanwhile, no one checked on me. Not a single call. Not one, "How are you holding up?" email. Ashcroft had moved on. But I hadn't. And I wasn't done. I hadn't worn a watch in years, but that week I noticed myself checking the clock obsessively. Not because I was in a rush, but because I had time. The kind of time you never get when you're buried in Q3 dashboards and Monday stand-ups. And I was using it. Every morning, I walked to a small cafe on Tejon Street, the kind of place with uneven wooden floors and baristas who remembered your name. I sat at a corner table, ordered an Americano, and opened my laptop. No one looked twice. I was just another laid-off mid-career guy figuring things out. Except I wasn't figuring things out. I was building a case. My ghost environment, the sandbox server I'd mirrored years ago for testing, had full copies of our real-time tenancy data, pricing schedules, and metadata tags. I began a personal audit, just like I used to do for quarterly presentations, but this time I wasn't filtering for what leadership wanted to hear. I was looking for patterns. It didn't take long. I found 14 tenant entities, all signed under different LLCs, supposedly occupying suites in properties that had been under renovation, condemned, or simply hadn't been leased in over a year. Their leases were perfectly structured, regular payments, term lengths, escalation clauses. But their EINs were recycled. A few belonged to defunct entities in New Mexico. Others traced back to holding companies registered to a single address in Bozeman, Montana. Every one of them listed Keyline Partners as the leasing broker. The shell game was elegant. Create ghost tenants. Inject fake lease income into valuation models. Present inflated asset growth to investors. Collect performance bonuses tied to that growth. And Vernon Glass? He'd arrived just before the scheme scaled. Before him, the company had operated conservatively, sometimes frustratingly so. But now, there were whispers of IPO ambitions. Capital injection from East Coast funds. All built on ghost paper. I ran a timeline overlay, Vernon's hire date, Keyline's first recorded deal, the sudden spike in building valuation growth, all within 60 days. I checked deeper. Keyline Partners LLC was registered under a holding company named Stillwell Holdings. The managing member of Stillwell? Renner Analytics LLC. Troy Renner. The consultant with no socks and perfect teeth. The guy who copied my dashboards and talked over me in meetings. This wasn't just fraud. This was planned orchestration, an ecosystem of deception built inside the very systems I had designed. And now they'd kicked me out, assuming I'd vanish quietly into some Denver afternoon. But I knew their architecture. I knew the weak points. And I knew where they weren't looking. The question wasn't, do I have enough? It was, how do I make it matter? I opened a blank document. Titled it, Ashcroft Internal Valuation Irregularities, Summary Report. I wasn't sending it. Not yet. First, I had to set the board's house on fire. Quietly, of course. The first move had to be small. Deliberate. Just loud enough to be heard, but quiet enough to be deniable. At 6:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, I created a new email address. ops.review@ashcroftreview.com. Not a real Ashcroft domain, but close enough. Just different enough. I built the shell site too, a barebones landing page with a password prompt and a footer citing a tenant experience audit in progress. No links. No branding. Just ambiguity. At 6:41 a.m., I sent a single email. To Vernon Glass. Subject: Occupancy Data Discrepancies, Rosedale Tower. Body: Several inconsistencies have been flagged in your occupancy reports for Rosedale Tower, specifically regarding units 4A, 4C, and 5D. Tenant EINs do not match records on file. Lease dates predate certificate of occupancy. Please advise. That's it. No name. No signature. Just friction. I didn't check the inbox again until lunch. 3 missed calls from a no-caller ID number. Then, finally, 1:22 p.m., a reply. From Vernon Glass. To ops.review@ashcroftreview.com. Not sure who you are or what you're implying. If this is an internal audit matter, you should already be aware of reporting channels. Otherwise, this communication constitutes harassment. Cease contact. Defensive. Immediate. A soft panic response. I smiled. An hour later, I texted an old contact, Miriam Ellison, former VP of Operations before she retired last year. Miriam was sharp, no bullshit, and more importantly, still had friends on the board. I didn't give her the details. Just this. Hypothetically, if someone discovered lease fraud tied to executive bonuses and third-party consultants, who on the board would actually read a report instead of burying it? She replied 14 minutes later. Winters. Mark Winters. Audit Committee Chair. Doesn't play politics. Why? No reason yet. Now I had my target. The next day, at 9:30 a.m., I sat at the same cafe with a clean version of the report on a USB drive. I walked 2 blocks to a mailbox on 17th Street and dropped it inside a padded envelope addressed in neat block print. Mark Winters. Chair, Audit Committee. Ashcroft and Bell. Corporate Headquarters. No return address. No fingerprints. Just information. Then I waited. Not for permission. For confirmation. And it came sooner than I expected. By Thursday morning, something had shifted. Ashcroft's investor portal went down for scheduled maintenance. Internal employee logins were routed through a new 2-factor authentication system. A sudden change, mid-quarter, with no prior notice. And on LinkedIn, Vernon's activity vanished. No posts. No comments. Radio silence. I'd seen this before. This wasn't security. This was containment. At 11:17 a.m., I got a text from Dev Patel, a former junior analyst I'd mentored during his first internship 3 years ago. Smart kid. Good instincts. Still at Ashcroft, still underpaid. Dev: hey, weird Q, do you know anything about the lease database being locked down? Even our team leads lost access. Me: haven't heard. You guys do that often. Dev: never. Vernon's been in closed meetings all day. Something's up. Something was up. I checked the USPS tracking code I'd memorized before mailing the envelope. It had been delivered to Ashcroft HQ 2 days ago, signed by B. Hargrove, one of the admin assistants I remembered from the 11th floor. That meant Mark Winters had it. Or someone close to him did. And if what Miriam had told me was true, Mark wouldn't sit on it. He'd read it. He'd verify it. Then he'd watch. That's what I was doing too. That night, I received a new email, this time to my personal account, the one never associated with Ashcroft. Subject: Follow-up, Tenant Data Anomalies. From mark.winters@ashcroftbell.com. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Mr. Hayes. Your report raised significant concerns. I've begun preliminary reviews with outside counsel and a third-party forensic auditor. Please confirm whether you are willing to speak off-record, with assurances of protection, regarding the contents. This is not a trap. I've been around long enough to spot the real ones. Mark Winters, Audit Committee Chair. No threats. No posturing. Just clarity. I replied the next morning. Yes. Off-record. With conditions. By Saturday, I was sitting in a discreet office suite above a dental clinic in Englewood, across from a lawyer in a grey wool blazer and Mark Winters himself. No tie, but every bit the man Miriam had described. Serious eyes. Weathered knuckles. The kind of guy who could spot cooked books from across a table. I laid out everything. The sandbox server. The duplicate lease data. The keyline, Stillwell, Renner triangle. The phantom tenants. The inflated valuations tied to executive comp packages. The timelines. No drama. No gloating. Just facts. Mark listened. Asked questions. His lawyer took notes. When I finished, he tapped a pen against the table for several seconds before speaking. How secure is your backup? Redundant. Encrypted. If anything happens to me, copies go to the SEC and the Denver Post. He nodded. A small smile. Smart. That was going to be my next question. By Monday, the storm began to build. Quiet at first, just an HR notice about departmental realignments, followed by Vernon's calendar being blocked out for the entire week. Then came the board's emergency session. By Tuesday morning, Ashcroft and Bell's internal messaging system had been disabled. Company-wide. Employees were instructed to limit written communications regarding active portfolio evaluations. A vague memo went out under the subject line, Temporary Operational Review, Confidential Compliance Initiative. That's corporate code for something is deeply wrong, and lawyers are now involved. I watched from a distance, not with popcorn, but with the grim clarity of a man who'd seen it coming. Who built the walls they were now trying to patch. Dev texted again that afternoon. Dev, they pulled Vernon out of the finance sink. Said he was on leave. But his name is gone from the org chart. Me. Sounds like vacation. Dev. He looked like a man getting off the Titanic in a bathrobe. I didn't respond. The real shift came Wednesday, just before 10 a.m., when a press release hit the Denver Business Journal. Ashcroft and Bell initiates internal audit following valuation concerns. Outside investigators engaged. No further comment at this time. No names. No details. But for those of us who spoke this language, it was a 5-alarm fire in 3 sentences. By Thursday, the board had placed Vernon Glass, Troy Renner, and 2 senior portfolio managers on administrative leave. Outside legal counsel confirmed that federal investigators had been briefed. And still, my name hadn't come up once. I stayed in the shadows, where I'd always been most effective. No demands. No interviews. I wasn't looking for credit. I was looking for a system correction, and it was happening. 1 week later, I received a call from Mark Winters. I let it go to voicemail. Cal. The board has reviewed everything. The full audits confirmed your findings, and then some. The SEC is involved now. We'd like to speak with you about a formal advisory role, reporting directly to governance. You'd have oversight authority. Let me know if we can talk. I listened to that message 3 times. Then I powered off my phone, closed the laptop, and stood at the window of my apartment. It was raining over the city. Slow, steady, cleansing. I wasn't smiling. But I wasn't angry anymore either. I had done what needed to be done. And the system, the one that tried to erase me, was finally correcting itself. The invitation came in a navy blue envelope. Embossed. Formal. Ashcroft and Bell, special board session. Inside was a short note, hand-signed by Mark Winters. We'd be honored to have you attend. As discussed, your insight has proven invaluable. I thought about throwing it away. Then I remembered something my father used to say. You don't always go back to be welcomed. Sometimes, you go back to be remembered correctly. The boardroom smelled like fresh wood polish and old money. 10 people sat around a long table. Some I knew. Some were new. All were quiet as I entered, wearing the only suit I owned that still fit well enough not to embarrass me. Mark stood and shook my hand firmly. No theatrics. Mr. Hayes, he said. Thank you for coming. I nodded. Took the seat nearest the window. Didn't touch the coffee they offered. Just listened. They laid it out. The internal audit had revealed over $9.1 million in false valuation padding. Troy Renner had fled the country. Vernon Glass was cooperating, under legal pressure. The firm had narrowly avoided SEC sanctions thanks to voluntary disclosure. Investor confidence was shaken, but not destroyed. Then came the offer. We want you back, Cal. But not in your old role. We want you as head of Integrity Systems. A new division. Reports directly to governance. Full autonomy. Full budget. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I slid a folder across the table. My terms. Veto power on valuation models. Oversight on all third-party contracting. No executive bonuses without my department's sign-off. And the freedom to walk, anytime, with full transparency. The room went quiet. The interim CEO, a woman named Lena Mercer, who looked like she'd been cleaning up a lot of messes lately, raised an eyebrow. This is unusual, she said. So was hiding ghost tenants in condemned buildings, I replied. Mark Winters smiled faintly and tapped the folder once. You'll have our answer by close of day. I didn't wait. I walked out of the building into the Colorado sun. Lighter than I'd felt in weeks. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need the job. I had my name back. The quiet guy. The one they'd underestimated. Now the system they built couldn't function without someone like me watching it. Not out of fear, but because it had finally remembered why people like me mattered. Later that night, I updated my LinkedIn profile for the first time in over a year. No grand post. No victory speech. Just one line. Integrity is not a feature. It's an architecture. And within minutes, the messages began to arrive. Former interns. Old colleagues. Strangers from other companies. Each one of them had a story. A question. A quiet thank you. Not because I made noise. But because I did the one thing they didn't expect. I watched. I listened. And I built the bridge they thought they could burn.